Hello, everyone. Thank you to all participants who took the time to be with us today and join this webinar. The meeting today is the first in a series of 3 meetings that will addresses different aspects of agri-food issues in a time of global crisis. Today, we will discuss a general and systemic aspect of the problems. We will try to learn and gain some insights on the state-wide readiness in both Israel and Singapore, and maybe on the global level as well. And maybe come to conclusion that will enable us to implement them soon. In the next 2 sessions in this series, we will focus especially on the contribution of technology in addressing and decreasing the damage level of this crisis, if at all. So my name is Nitza Kardish, and I'm the CEO of Trendlines Agrifood Fund acting for Singapore. We are investing in agri-food technology in Singapore and in the rest of the world. And I'm happy to let you know that we are just finalizing our 3rd investment since we started 6 months ago. We opened our accelerator program in Singapore, and we have already 4 projects that was chosen to this project. So as you can see, we are very active these days in spite of the virus. So you are welcome to approach us if you have a great technology company and you are looking for a great partnerships. I'm pleased and honored to have with us today 2 experts in the food industry, Professor Eyal Shimoni, VP Technology of the Strauss Group, and Mr. Yip Hon Mun, an investor in Agrifood and former CEO of Sino-Singapore. Eyal and Hon Mun, thank you very much for your willingness to be with us today. And I hope that our conversation will allow us to touch some issues that maybe are a little bit controversial and are not part of the consensus. And perhaps we will have some insight that will benefit to all of us. In addition to the question I will address to our distinguished panelists, we would also like to receive questions from you, our audience is in this webinar, and we try to answer as many questions as we can, pending on our time limit. So let's start now. Eyal, are you, let's just a moment. Okay, I can see you, great. So let's start with Professor Shimoni. As we all know, being ready and perhaps for, and prepare for dark days can make a difference in handling those dark days. So in light of that, can you specify, and from your, of course, vast experience, what you think the strengths and the weaknesses of the state of Israel in the field of food security are, and how these have been articulated and are still being expressed during this current crisis. Like, for example, and it will be only an example, the fact that the government of Israel has for years preferred to import cheap food and products from China, Turkey, and other places, thereby reducing the production of local farmers and, of course, increasing the risk of local supply in time of crisis. So how do we maintain the balance between this? But as I said, this is just an example, and I'd love to hear your broad perspective on that.
Thank you, Nitza. Thank you, everybody, for attending this. It's I think we should, the global perspective and then the Israeli perspective. Globally, the food industry has some kind of a preferred status on any global crisis, simply because it's an essential aspect of people's lives. So in any affected area, governments and we experience in many geographies that we are operated in, governments give priority to the food sector, not only the food industry. Even in the origin of the current pandemic, in the hardest closure on the province and on the city, the Chinese army kept the roads open for the trucks and for the food supply chain. So, so to speak, in Israel, as a specific example, we are unfortunate to experience many emergencies from other type. And by regulation, the food supply chain is considered as an essential industry. So in that sense, keeping the ports open, keeping the employees in the plants, keeping the whole supply chain operative was something that was almost obvious, even in light of this pandemic. As for the supply of, I would call it agro materials and raw materials from out of the country, Israel, and it's no news to anybody, geopolitically, we're an island. So being a geopolitical island, we have I would call it in some aspects, we are dependent on the external supplies, regardless of governmental policies, by nature. On top of it, you may have some governmental policies that may affect that. But generally speaking, I have to say, we could not really feel any particular shortage in raw materials. Some point issues. There was in Israel, Israelis know this example, the big egg shortage in Israel. But this kind of shortage is not related to import. It's more related to planning. This time of the year, 10% of Israelis are traveling abroad. And so the market was planning for the 90% that will be left here. Unfortunately, the market increased by 15%, naturally because people didn't travel. So you got anywhere between 10 to 20% increase in demand, unexpected, unplanned, and there was I would call it almost a natural shortage. On top of it, you can add the panic, stocking and piling products way beyond anyone can eat. You had this halo effect of blockages. But when we relate to the supply chain, not feel any drama, and we did not experience any drama in commodities. You should also take into account, and this would be my last comment on this, that in this time of crisis, there's places where demand increases sharply, which is the domestic demand, but all the away from home is dropping sharply. Hotels, restaurants, food services, etc., etc. So you have excess of supplies because of lack of demand in a very significant sector. Okay, some of the companies produce half of their products for the away from home market. So if tens of % of the demand are gone because of the hotels and tourism and everything, then you have an increase of availability of other supplies. So experience, there are other things to talk about, local and from the environmental aspects, and also from, I would say, ethics. But I think in terms of that particular event that we're experiencing, we did not experience any significant effect to date. I must say to date. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Eyal. Maybe we will get back to you after I will address a question to Han Mun, because I would like you to refer to the difficulties or crises that the Israeli local farmers our experience, from the other side of that they have a lot of product and yields that, so it is an issue as well. But let me move to Han Mun now. Thank you, Han Mun, for being with us. And can you please share with us what is the current situation in Singapore regarding local food production, taking in consideration that Singapore is not self-sufficient from food security perspective? What are the advantages, the strengths that Singapore has and that help to overcome this crisis, and for how long it can maintain, as Eyal say, for now, so for how long it can maintain, in your opinion?
Well, thanks, Nitza, for having me, and thanks everybody for, I heard we have like 300 registered participants, so that's probably the largest webinar that I've ever attended, so that's a real honor. I mean, being the only Singaporean around, so I guess I would be representing everybody. So I would say a few things. I think number one is the COVID-19 pandemic actually helped all of us, including the authorities as well as businesses, understand our food security strategy better, for the better or worse, right? We learned how fragile our actually system is. We thought we had a good system, but then to be fair to all the planners, I don't think anybody has anticipated how serious this affects us. So no matter what kind of planning we put in, it's just as good as the assumptions that we put in. But having said that, I think the authorities as well as the businesses has put in measures to strengthen it as we go. You probably have seen some of the announcement out there. And it's always in crisis like this that we learn and adapt. So I would like to say that has been the Singapore spirit. And then I just want to start by saying that way back in 2007 and 2008, Singapore actually twice experienced a similar food security crisis. Those were the times when I think oil prices was rocket high, and then we had disruption in the food supply, as well as some of the food is diverted to biofuels and so on. And that is actually prompted us to develop a strategy focusing on about 3 pillars. I understand these 3 pillars because I'm involved in 2 of them. So the first pillar is about stockpiling and expand our source of supplies where we get food from. I think today we have about 130 countries or sources that we get our food from, so that we don't have to overly rely on one single source. Like I think Professor was talking about how cheap the goods from China is. So we want to resist that temptation to just overly rely on one certain source. And the second thing, very important, is developing self-production capabilities. And this is the part that we have been telling the government we should do this, but then everything is kind of market play, market rule. One of the urban farms came to me and said, it took us 10 years before they grant us this license or extend the lease length, because the government has to balance between, Singapore has very little land, we all know. And they have to balance in the use of land and say, is this better off growing food, or is this better off using it to make it into industrial parks so they can bring better returns from Singapore? They've been struggling with that. And I think that formula will change because of this pandemic. And we should give them some time to change that. But we are beginning to see that during the past maybe 4 weeks or so, and you probably have read that there is a SFA $30 million grant immediately was given, well, in April this month, right? They are giving out to Singapore companies that could focus on ramping up production in Singapore in the next 6 to 24 months, especially in the areas of eggs, leafy vegetables, and fish, because these are the 3 most commonly consumed in Singapore. So if you are urban farm today, and a few friends of mine who is in that area, as well as fish as well, and eggs, if you want to go expand your facilities, you want to put in some new tech equipment, go out and apply for that grant. Then the third one would be diversification of food sources. And I was, I think Nitza introduced me as the former CEO of Sino-Singapore Jilin Food Zone. I had the privilege of being the CEO of that food zone. It's a very interesting concept. After 2007 and 8, when we have the food crisis, Singapore said, look, if we don't have land, let's go out and find a place where we have land and we can grow good product. Not only that, we apply Singapore's good management style to make, and then by the way, Singapore is ranked #1 consecutively for a couple of years by EIU to be food security and things like that. So we know how to keep food secure, but we don't have land. So the whole idea is we strike out a deal with at that time President Wen Jiabao of China, and we had a piece of land twice the size of Singapore, 1,470 square kilometers. So to grow anything we want, black soy, one of the 3 pieces of black soy left in the world. So those are the things that Singapore is trying. So those are the 3 main pillars: stockpiling, developing self-production capability, as well as diversification of food sources. So this is the background on it. Now, when we have this strategy, I think Nitza has a question that says, what is the advantage of in Singapore, right? I think in many ways we are quite blessed. We have a hardworking government who plans ahead, very similar to, I think, Israel as well. You probably heard of Singaporeans being very kiasu, meaning we are afraid to lose. So we are afraid that we'll lose our job, we lose our food, so we plan a lot. We do a lot of planning. But no matter what kind of planning you have, it cannot be perfect. I think we all understood that. So, but in return, because of this, majority of the populations, I believe, tend to trust the Singapore government. So give you an example, weeks ago when the government say, don't put on mask unless you are sick, no one complained. And now the government say, change their mind, put on a mask. and we don't complain. So we basically listen, we think they know what they're doing. So I think so far, if this trust still continue to go on, it makes any implementation of the policy from the government a lot easier and more effective. So that's, I think, is an advantage. Now, the challenges that we face, and I'm beginning to see this in both the business that we are in, is the sudden disruptions to the supply chain and production. So even though Singapore has like food security, let's say, for example, during the 2007 and 8, we have our rice, we have a strategic stockpile. It used to be like for 3 months, and now it's reduced to 2 months because, you know, during peace times, the food suppliers say, hey, it's not very practical and cost effective if you have to keep 50 tons of the rice in there and nobody is using it. But this pandemic actually shows that even 3 months is not enough, because if we continue to do something like this, and looks like this pandemic is not going to go away next month, then our stockpile needs to actually start reviewing it. So stockpiling, one, diversification, and then I think finally, I mean, moving forward, I'm actually quite confident that you know, with all the trust and the planners that we have, we will emerge pretty strong and more resilient. And I think our basic strategy still stays in terms of food security.
Yeah. Thank you, Han Mun, for the comprehensive answer. Eyal, as I said before, there is a point that we'd like to go and refer to. It is the situation of our farmers with yield that they can't sell because of the reduction in sources of buying from restaurant for export. But I would like to ask you the next question, and you can connect between these two issues. One of the biggest problems in our industry, I believe, is food waste. Although in this time of crisis, people tend not to speak about it because it's like a luxury, but it is not. And what I'm thinking to myself is, is the corona crisis will change the behavior or the situation regarding food, home food waste. It is known that in Israel, an average family throw away about 1/4 of its food. Will people now save more or will the excessive storing effect actually have the opposite impact? So is there an opportunity here that should not be ignored and should be leveraged for improving the food waste problem in regular time as well?
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you very
Yeah,
well.
I had the lapse. I had the lapse in the communication.
Yeah.
So let's start with the farmers. I think the drama of the Israeli farmers is the drama of lack of go-to-market now, because the markets are closed. And as I said, away from home is not working. As an Israeli company, we're an Israeli company, although we're global, we're an Israeli-based company. We are very concerned about the ecosystem. We feel that we have at least partial responsibility to do something about it. So one of the things that goes and develops pretty fast globally and also in Israel is all the direct to consumer. We all experience that. So one of the things we did, and we launched it about, I think, 2 weeks ago, together with the Israeli Innovation Authority, and we developed a platform for farmers to introduce the direct-to-consumer channel, which is a drop in the sea, as they say. Okay, it's very little, but it's something. We have, I think, almost 200 farmers by now registered. But I think we need some kind of governmental policy to deal with that, because at the moment, Israel is still important fresh produce, while we have excess of production in Israel. This is something that can really be solved by governmental policies rather than interventions of businesses as big as Strauss, although we are big, but not as big as a government. So I would really think that there's probably two ways this thing can be tackled, is by government intervention. And I want now to connect it to the food waste question. I think that the direct-to-consumer, that part of it will stay, will help a lot, especially in the ultra-fresh categories, because if it's an on-demand delivery and right on time, then the ultra-fresh poses more opportunities for consumption now and not keeping in the fridge and throwing away. I think another effect is going to be, it's not a financial crisis, it's much bigger than that. This specific crisis we're experiencing now, it's no question we're going to some kind of depression. We're not sure how deep it's going to be, but some kind is going to be. And people are going to be more aware. I look at it rather than, the depression is not something that can be solved by Strauss, but so I'd rather look at this as an opportunity. I think one of the values, the new values that we're making for consumers is developing the products in a way that helps them not to throw away, okay? That's the best phrasing I can put around this thing. And it's really funny enough, just before this call, and this is why I was a little late, Nitza, sorry, I had a discussion with my team about how do we do that, okay? Because you always ask yourself as a food and beverage company, what values do I bring to my consumers? And in times of depression, they're the classical ones, price, all these things, but reducing their domestic waste of what they buy could be an added value for businesses. And I think that businesses that will find a way to do it in the right way may have a new value for consumers. And I think you said that food waste sounds like a luxury thing to discuss in this time of crisis,
Not
but I think it's
an opinion.
I know. I know not your opinion, but I'm saying it may sound like. I think it's a very timely discussion. In times of shortage, whether in resources, whether challenges in the supply chain, whether it is in the resources of the consumer, it might be just on the contrary. it might be just the perfect time to talk about reducing food waste. And part of it is, by the way, reducing the waste of throwing away tons of agro-produce in Israel while importing tons from out of Israel, which doesn't make any sense. So I think, to sum it up, food waste is a very timely topic to discuss, I think. And as a final product company, I think we may have an opportunity to bring new value to consumers.
That's great, Eyal. I totally agree with you. And Han Mun, again, in Singapore, food waste makes up about half of the average, 1.5 kilogram of waste disposed of by each householder in Singapore daily. Rice, noodles, and even bread are the most commonly wasted food items. What can be done to reduce this waste, especially during the time of crisis? But as discussed before with Professor Shimoni, in general, I think that this is an issue that we can't and we won't ignore in our industry.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Nitza, and Professor Shimoni as well. This is a global issue. I mean, more so in well-to-do cities like us. And I remember when I was very young, we don't waste anything. I still remember I was a little chubby when I was young. When we go out and eat Chinese food, right? You have a plate with some gravy left after some garlic from stir-fried vegetables. We would take another bowl of rice, put it on top, and then finish that. Nothing is waste. You know, you basically lapped up. You know, that was in the 70s or something like that. But these days we don't. There's so much leftover food. In fact, just to add to Nitza's comment, was that actually in Singapore, the 342 million Sing dollars, that's about 200 million and above US dollars of food is actually wasted. And out of the whole waste that Singapore produced, 20% come from food. And that's not good. And there's a trend since, I think it was 2008, 34% increase in food waste. So these are not good numbers. But the good thing about that is the government is taking notice, the industry is taking notice, and so is the consumer, which is very important. To me, to solve the food waste problem in Singapore, around the world, is like a three-leg stool. If you take out one, it's not going to work. So let me kind of share a little bit about what we're doing in Singapore. As far as the government initiative is concerned, it's a combination of policy and partnership with the industry major players, especially the food industry, to reduce food waste and convert food waste into animal feed, for example. So I think in by year 2024, in 4 years' time, those developers of the new premise, they would have to set aside space for food waste treatment systems so that all these waste can be treated on site. And this is by year 2024. So they mandate to the industry. Now, the industry themselves also putting their own initiative. For example, there's one mall, a local mall over here, get all their tenants to contribute food to Singapore Food Bank, for example, at the end of the day, for the food that is still edible, but they cannot sell. And then I think on the social side of it, which we see is actually quite encouraging, there's a lot of ground-up movements such as the Singapore Food Bank, Food Rescue, Ugly Good, and all this, which I've never heard of in the old days. They're using social media like Facebook and Telegram, and they find ways to actually reduce food waste at the ground level. For example, one of them would collect unfinished cooked food that can be eaten and then distribute them and giving them away through Facebook, through Telegram. For example, they target people like the child care center, universities. It is now, I realize, it's also very common to bring back food, leftover food that you have at the restaurants. In the old days, it's like not socially acceptable, but now it seems to be more socially acceptable when you go to a restaurant So the word tapao is quite common these days, or doggy bag in the US, even though we don't have a dog at home. But that's fine. More importantly, I think these are the small little effort, but it brings the awareness of the consumer, which is very important. So it becomes socially acceptable. In fact, it becomes cool to say that I'm bringing this back, even though there's just half a chicken wing. The chicken wing left on the plate. We say we're going to bring it home and we eat it tomorrow. That's why you look pretty cool. In the old days, it wasn't very cool. Now, but the bigger ones are like the conferences. Singapore is very big in MICE conferences and things like that. There's a lot of food out there, always over cater, unfortunately. And conferences, weddings, and events, they actually have a scheme to encourage people to come and take these food away and consume them. So the whole idea is, as long as food is consumed and eaten, it's not wasted. So that's the social part of it, which we think it is pretty good in working in Singapore.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And I'm really happy that we raised this issue, especially in this time, because it is not less important than other food security matters. So I hope that it will resonate in with our audience, and that our countries will do something that really be beneficial for that problem. So Eyal, I asked myself, what would happen the next time a disease will attack, but this time it will be, the entire population, and not just people in my age, okay? And what would happen if the crisis goes on for 10 months, a year, and not only for 2 months? Is there a room to invest in food production effort and technologies which are considered like superfood, that have a longer shelf life and higher nutritional value? I don't know, it's my imagination maybe, but something like that. The astronaut food, or something that you really keep to enable civilization survive. And Han Mun, following the Eyal answers, it would be nice to understand your point of view on that. And maybe this is something that can be produced in Singapore, and maybe there is a place for collaboration here. So, Eyal.
Wow, tough question. I think that first, it's important to understand that saying after the crisis, people saying after the crisis, using this terminology, this after the crisis is going to be about 2 years probably, anywhere between 6 months to probably 2 years. So I think talking about the next pandemic that may last for 10 months, we don't have to wait to the next pandemic, we're in it, okay? So I think the challenge of functioning in a completely, or at least significantly different environment is here to stay for a year, probably 2, or maybe 2, okay? Having said that, there's a few things that will change in people's lives. People will probably eat less out of home, will probably eat more at home. And as I said, there will be more, direct to consumer, etc., etc. All the social distancing, some parts of it will remain, whether by regulation or by simply social behavior that will be kept for a while. And why am I saying it? Because I think that having said all of this, okay, people would love to have real food, despite these occurrences. And I think you mentioned the term astronaut food, okay? This is something which is really good for emergency. I don't know how many people from this audience know, but my hobby, although, this camera makes me look a little different, more chubby than I am, I'm doing ultramarathons. This is my hobby. And during a multi-day ultramarathon, what you eat during the 6 or 7 days of running 250 kilometers is astronaut food. So from that experience, I do not expect anyone to enjoy using this kind of food for too long. Okay.
But we
So
can make it, we can make it food.
well, you can make it tasty, but it cannot be your sole part of your sole diet. Okay, your complete diet based on these kind of foods. So it may be good solution like supplementing things or for specific occasions and stuff like that. I do think that yes, in times where people go out less, okay, in times of periodical shortages in this or that raw material, we should be more careful in providing high quality nutritious food to people, okay? This is one. We may need to think of supplementing or enriching food or producing food from sources with X or Y or Z excess vitamins. For example, there's some scientific data, if I'm relating to the coronavirus, that vitamin D may help coping with the respiratory challenges of coronavirus. So just an example. So yes, maybe these parts. But I think the general rules will be there and they will win. It has to be tasty. It gotta have good nutritious value, basic nutrition value, and I also think in some ways extended shelf life is going to be a key. That part I think is important. But I think dramatic shift in what people eat. Digitization is misleading. Okay, our biology is not evolving like iPhones. Okay, so there's a dissonance there. I think our biology will be more of the same.
All right, thank you. Hanun.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your questions again. I think this is one of those that got me very excited when you give me this question. So especially when you term it as astronaut food. So I'm looking more like down to earth rather than up in the space station. My definition of astronaut food is growing vegetables without using soy, pesticides, and using LED lights and things like that. And I think I've spent quite a bit of time. In fact, when I get into ag tech and food tech, I mean, I have a background in engineering as well as, I work for tech companies. So I naturally like to see technology. And I used to think technology can solve everything until I jump into agriculture and food. I know how difficult it is, but I still have a lot of faith that technology can solve the problem that we have. Maybe not immediately, but longer term. And through the understanding of what are the things, including social, including government, and so on. So back to the astronaut food. So if I define it by saying, can we improve on the food that we grow, let's say fresh produce on hydroponic, aeroponics, and stuff like that. I think we are making quite a bit of good progress. The only problem is if you today look at the food that we call it a plant factory, by the way, 10 stories of industrial type of trays with LED lights and grow food. If today you look at it and said, now the food produced, I know it's more nutritious, it's fresher, it's crispier and things like that, but it's so expensive. Then we have a problem here because plant factories have not reached the economies of scales for different reasons. But at the same time, most importantly is a lot of the vegetables today that are grown in open field is subsidized, just like the meat out there as well. So it's quite tough to compete with that unless we all take a step back and take a look at it in a very holistic manner. Can we continue to produce fresh produce the way it is, and also rear animals, produce meat the way it is, and still be able to, this is a cliche thing, right? Feed 9.5 billion people in year 2050. I don't know. I don't think so. I can't find a solution, but I guess technology has a solution. The only thing is it's not so much of technology solving the problem, but really for us to have a different mindset. Where do we put the priority? And I think I say this to the Singapore policymakers as well. In the old days, we were all looking, it's fine to import 90% of our food as long as we go out, we have this food diversification. But I think this pandemic actually taught us a few lessons. I think we cannot measure food security by just economic value. We have to take a look back and say, okay, it is okay to pay a bit more for the fresh produce that we have instead of relying on the cheapest out there. I think that mentality needs to change. I don't have an answer for that, but I think I honestly, on my side itself, I think Nitza, we spoke about this. I even come to you with a concept that says, I would like to, I want to found a company to improve seeds that are currently used in open field for indoor vertical farms and greenhouses without using gene editing, by the way, because you don't have to CRISPR everything. I mean, that if you can increase 30% of the yield by improving on the seeds for indoor farms and for greenhouses, you can actually have a business case. And we went through that, by the way, with one of the top 3 plant factories. So I think we just got to think harder to do things like that. Now, higher nutrition value, this is also, and yield is the #1 commercial value that that is useful when we put into our business case. The second thing is nutrition value. So imagine we will have this vegetables that we eat actually will replace the vitamins that we have, pills that we have to pop into our body. We don't mind paying a bit more out of that. So I'm a bit optimistic in what Nitza is saying. You can call me a sucker in that, but I'll still be continuing to search for good startups to look at this.
Okay, thank you, Eyal and Han Mun, for helping me land from the space to the ground. This is my natural place, so I feel much more safe now. I have another issue regarding globalization, food, and solidarity, but time is running, and I would really like to hear some questions from the audience. So we will move now to Sarai Kemp. She is moderating the Q&A. Sarai is our business development in our fund. And if time will allow us, I'll go back to my last issue before we end this panel. Sarai, please.
Hi, everybody. So there are a few questions. I'm going to start with some general ones and maybe a few more specific. So the first question is the COVID-19 aftermath, what changes do you believe will occur in the way food is manufactured and consumed? For example, in packaged food, ready to eat, trends, etc. It goes to everybody, the 3 of you. Eyal, do you want to start?
Whoa, I would love to have the answers. Can anybody hand me the answers? It's extremely highly business value to have the answers. But, I think to start with, people will, we see that people trust packaged food because people are concerned about health and they believe that something which is packed and sealed is probably safe. So we see that. How long will it last? We don't know. As far as, and it's a culture dependent, of course. I'm talking about Israel, maybe Europe. And I would love to about Singapore because I don't know what is the sentiment in Singapore about that. So I think packaged food will something that attract people to start with at the moment because everything, then everything which has this connotation of healthy, and it doesn't matter in which form it comes, or healthier will be attractive to consumers. But in terms of habits, as I said before, it will be more at home, less away from home, more cooking occasions. Everything related to cooking at home is increasing now. So, and it's good. It's great that people are cooking at home. It's yet another opportunity. So I think these things, part of how intensive this increase is going to be kept, we don't know, but we're confident some of it will stay.
So I'm just going to add on to what Professor said. And then I think Professor has started by painting the picture that this pandemic is not going to go away in 1 or 2 months. It's going to last 6 months to a year. I totally agree. A lot of us are so used to staying at home, whipping up recipes. So I do see ready to eat to be very popular. In fact, I happen to be involved in a plant-based meat company. I'm seeing the valuation of plant-based meat companies didn't come down. In fact, continue to go up. I'm also seeing that Beyond Meat, corn, in the retail market, Omnipork, all these actually fly off the shelf if you price it right. So the switch to more nutrition, plant-based meat, all this is going to increase, but more down to earth, ready to eat definitely will increase. Ready to cook also, because people are beginning to, ready to cook meaning, I think in Europe is a lot more popular. You get the sauce and then you buy the raw ingredients, so you could actually go down to the kitchen and start something like this and make it. So in Singapore, probably not. But now I think more and more, the sauce and the ingredients, you put it together. So that's actually value add to the food manufacturers. Now, if we can extend the shelf life of the food, that would be good, but not at the expense of putting chemicals and so on.
Okay. Samai?
Yeah, so there's a question in different variations, so I'm going to try to capture all in one. We've seen countries fighting with one another for limited testing and medical equipment, pushing up prices. Are we going to fight over food? Are there any other solutions to do that? Maybe some resources to be efficiently allocated, avoiding increased prices and misallocations.
That's very interesting question and comment, because that was my last issue that I wanted to raise and ask you guys. Really the phenomena that we are witness these days with the medical equipment, where countries are enclosed and not assisting or sharing with each other, as if really solidarity is dead. Can we think on arrangement at the state level that will set up an organization or foundation or whatever it is for food security, where each country is committed to, to sharing its strengths and accepting something for its weaknesses? I believe that yes, it has to be geographically based in order to avoid the long distance transportation, which is one of the problems in this time. But can this organization establish during good time and the function as accumulate asset from all partners in this foundation or organization to share as needs during the crisis? I think maybe to combine this idea with the question that was raised from probably many others, it seems like it is an important issue. What do you think?
So let me refer to that. So first, I think that generally speaking, it would be an interesting idea, but I will refer to the reality because I think the reality is not really supporting the need. Personally, I would love to have this agreement with France so they can share the wine with us and we can share something else with them, but we'll see. But seriously speaking, I think the reaction, we should differentiate between the reaction around medical equipment and medical care utensils and raw materials and food. What we've seen in the medical care initially, and it's very, in that sense, it's very similar, by the way, not really so different. At the very early stages of the crisis, each country first held back what it had, okay? So it happened with the medical care equipment, and it happened also with the local resources. You see now declarations by Kazakhstan and by Russia about wheat and you see some declaration by other countries, but this is because these countries are at the early stages of the pandemic. Look at the graph of Russia. Russia is now on the exponential curve. So they are holding back. They are now in the panic phase, okay? If you look at, for example, Israel, about a month and a half ago, when we were at the exponential phase, the Israeli government had first discussions how we pile up inventory of dry goods and materials, okay? So I think this is a first stage reaction of many countries, but as countries get control over the situation, they are releasing these blockages. So generally speaking, I think it will be an interesting idea. We will have to wait for the pandemic to go away, because before that, nobody will be willing to talk about this concept. But I'm not sure that the need is so dramatic, okay? Because as a producing company, we didn't really see shortages, to be honest. Where it might affect, and this is a moral discussion rather than a financial question. The less, I would say, in developing countries, in less affluent parts of the world, okay, there we will see the effect. The UN is talking about hunger. There is not going to be hunger in Singapore. There is not going to be hunger in Israel. There is going to be hunger in other places of the world. So in that sense, it's a moral question rather than a business question, okay? And this is something to be dealt by the world.
Okay. Han Mun? Han Mun, would you like to refer to this issue?
I think we are in the same situation as well. I don't think we share the same concerns that that Professor has mentioned. Yeah, I don't think we have we are any different from what we are today. Yeah.
Okay, Sarai, do you have we have more questions?
There's a few questions about alternative protein, focusing also about the ingredients, whether they are considered to be healthy, also about the market adaptation, whether they should go first to Europe or maybe developing countries or East Asia, and also about making sure that there are no fake ingredients inside those alternative protein products. Since there's a lot of questions surrounding this area, I would ask you to maybe relate to that specific vertical of alternative protein.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Many of them, but surrounding alternative protein, whether we can consider them as healthy products, or should we be aware of the different ingredients?
Protein.
Yes, alternative protein, the cultured meat-based plant, and all the others, and also about the marketing perspective of those specific products, whether it's wise for them first to sell them in the US and in Europe, rather than maybe going to Singapore and other countries in the region.
So since Singapore is a country that invested and investing a lot of effort and money in this issue of plant-based protein and alternative protein, beyond meat and other, Han Mun, if you have your perspective on that regarding, is it really a healthy or healthier than eating a steak, or we should consider that as something that you have to re-evaluate?
Yeah, I think I put things into perspective, as well as putting things in relative terms, right? So the piece of meat that I eat today, if I grow it myself or rear it myself, I know what goes into the animal feed and the kind of chemical antibiotics that go inside. I would say, yeah, I would avoid any of those processed food. But the reality of it is I don't have that luxury. And then I have to compare a piece of meat that I bought And by the way, a piece of meat, all meats are not created equal either. And versus this plant-based, I look at the whole thing. If I just look at in terms of the kind of additive that is put in, and I'm not allergic to soy, by the way. So I'm okay to have soy isolate, process them. But then if I compare product A, both of them are soy, one has more ingredients, more process, more sodium, more nitrate, or whatever it is compared to the other, I'll naturally choose this. What I'm trying to say is I think today is very difficult to have food that is totally natural. And even organic, in my personal view, is not going to be sustainable. We need to take a look at it by saying that what can we do? It's a matter of compromise. How can we feed everybody, but yet at the same time, not destroy the environment and be healthy at the same time? So it's a very tough question. And I think we ourselves as consumer need to probably rely on the authorities like our government. I mean, in Singapore, I mean, not all governments are reacted equal. So you have the FDA, you have the US Food Agency, they have different criteria in measuring that. But I think in general, like in Singapore, the plant-based meat, are they safe to eat? They are safe to eat. So far, they're still okay. There's a lot of controversial on, by the way, some of the plant-based product that has GMOs, doing a fake blood and all this, whether it's safe. So far, I think the FDA, the Singapore authorities there's no evidence that says it is not. But if you compare to a lot of the food out there, the processed and the non-processed one, the amount of harmful chemicals that they put inside, we need to make that balance. And I think that's something that is more of an individual choice than anything else, in my view.
Yeah, thank you very much, Han Mun. Time is running, and I just want to, when I'm going to finalize this insightful discussion, I just want to share with you something that was mentioned in the last few weeks in a different occasion, which I absolutely agree with, and it's that the COVID-19 crisis is not a black swan. It is certainly a white one, and was predicted by Nassim Taleb in 2007, as he wrote in his book. As we travel more on this planet, epidemics will be more acute. I see risks in very strong and strange virus spreading throughout the planet. Today, he is claiming, and I agree, that this pandemic was preventable. I hope that we were at least able to raise some questions today that will assist us to better prepare for the next pandemic that, in my pessimistic approach in life, will certainly come. And thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you again in our next webinar soon, the next meeting in this series. Professor Shimoni, thank you very much. Han Mun, dear audience, stay safe and keep this planet healthy as well. Thank you.